Good evening everyone. I'm the storyteller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax. The Hollow Children, by Black Hollow Stories. The whispering woods, the forest was never silent. Even at night, when the world seemed to hold its breath, the trees whispered. Their voices were low, guttural, like the growl of a predator stalking its prey. The villagers of Black Hollow called it the Wind's Song, but they never lingered long enough to listen too closely. They knew better. It was here, in the shadow of the pines, that the first child disappeared. Little Tommy Grayson was only 7 when he vanished. One moment, he was chasing fireflies at the edge of the woods. The next, he was gone. The search parties scoured the forest for days, their lanterns cutting through the oppressive darkness, but they found nothing. No footprints, no torn clothing, not even a single firefly. 10 years later, Tommy returned. He walked out of the woods at dawn, his clothes clean, his face uniged, and his eyes hollow. When asked where he'd been, he simply smiled and said, "I was playing." Tommy was the first, but he wouldn't be the last. The journalist, Emily Grayson, hated the woods. Even now, as she stood on the porch of her childhood home, the dense wall of pines seemed to loom closer than she remembered. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, and the wind carried with it the faint, metallic tang of something she couldn't quite place. She hadn't been back to Black Hollow in over a decade. Not since her brother, Daniel, disappeared. Emily was a journalist now, working for a small but respected online magazine. She built her career on exposing the truth, no matter how ugly it was. But this story, the story of the Hollow Children, was personal. The villagers had always been tight-lipped about the disappearances. They spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting toward the woods as if afraid the trees might overhear. But Emily had heard the rumors. Children vanishing without a trace. Years passing. And then, like Tommy, they'd return. Changed. She'd come back to Black Hollow to find out why. The first clue, the town hadn't changed much. The same weathered houses lined the narrow streets, their windows dark and uninviting. The same general store stood at the center of town, its sign creaking in the wind. And the same uneasy silence hung over everything, broken only by the occasional caw of a crow. Emily's first stop was the Grayson house. Her parents had moved away years ago, unable to bear the memories, but the house still stood, empty and decaying. The front door groaned as she pushed it open, the air inside thick with dust and the faint scent of mildew. She found Daniel's room exactly as he'd left it. The bed was neatly made, the shelves lined with toys and books. A layer of dust covered everything, but otherwise, it was as if time had stopped. Emily's chest tightened as she picked up a framed photo from the nightstand. It was a picture of the two of them, taken just weeks before Daniel disappeared. He was smiling, his eyes bright with mischief. She'd give anything to see that smile again. As she set the photo down, something caught her eye. A small, leather-bound journal was tucked beneath the bed, its cover worn and cracked. Emily's heart raced as she picked it up. Daniel had always been a meticulous note-taker, even as a child. If there was any clue to what had happened to him, it would be here. She opened the journal and began to read. The underground, the journal was filled with Daniel's neat, childish handwriting. Most of the entries were mundane, observations about the weather, notes on his favorite books, the occasional doodle. But as Emily flipped through the pages, the tone began to change. "I hear them at night," one entry read. "They whisper my name. Mom and Dad say it's just the wind, but I know it's not. They're calling me." Emily's hands trembled as she turned the page. "I found the door today," the next entry said. "It's in the woods. hidden behind the big oak tree. I didn't go in, but I could feel it watching me. I think it wants me to come back. The final entry was dated the day Daniel disappeared. I'm going to see what's inside. Don't worry, Em. I'll be back soon. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She'd always assumed Daniel had been taken against his will. But what if he'd gone willingly? What if he'd been lured? She had to find that door. The cult, the woods were darker than Emily remembered. The trees seemed to close in around her, their branches twisting like skeletal fingers. The air was thick with the scent of pine and something else, something sharp and acrid that made her stomach churn. She found the oak tree easily enough. It was the largest in the forest, its trunk gnarled and twisted, its roots digging deep into the earth. Behind it, half hidden by a tangle of undergrowth, was a door. It was small, barely large enough for a child to fit through, and made of weathered wood. The handle was rusted, and the hinges were thick with moss. Emily's heart pounded as she reached for it. The door opened with a creak, revealing a set of stone steps leading down into the darkness. The air that wafted up was cold and damp, carrying with it the faint sound of chanting. Emily hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to turn back, to run as far away as she could. But she couldn't. Not now. Not when she was so close. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. The entity, the underground chamber, was vast, its walls lined with flickering torches that cast long, dancing shadows. The air was thick with the scent of incense and something else, something metallic and coppery that made Emily's stomach turn. At the center of the chamber stood a group of figures, their faces hidden beneath hooded robes. They were chanting in a language Emily didn't recognize, their voices low and guttural. And then she saw them, the children. They stood in a circle, their faces pale and expressionless, their eyes hollow. They were dressed in simple white robes, their hands clasped in front of them. Emily's heart ached as she recognized one of them, Daniel. He looked exactly as he had the day he disappeared. His hair was still the same sandy brown, his face still round with baby fat. But his eyes were empty. Daniel, Emily whispered, her voice trembling. He turned to look at her, his expression blank. And then he spoke. You shouldn't have come, Em. Before Emily could respond, the chanting grew louder, the air thickening with a palpable sense of dread. The ground beneath her feet began to tremble, and the shadows on the walls seemed to come alive, twisting and writhing like living things. And then she saw it. The entity. It was massive, its form shifting and indistinct, like smoke caught in a breeze. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed with a cold, malevolent light. Emily's breath caught in her throat as it turned its gaze on her, and she felt a wave of terror so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. Run, Daniel said, his voice barely audible over the chanting. It's watching you now. The watcher. Emily ran. She didn't stop until she was out of the woods, her lungs burning and her legs trembling with exhaustion. She collapsed on the porch of the Grayson house, her mind racing. She'd found Daniel, but he wasn't the brother she remembered. He was something else, something hollow, and the entity. Emily shuddered as she remembered its eyes. They'd been filled with a hunger so vast it defied comprehension. A hunger for her. She knew she should leave. She should get in her car and drive as far away from Black Hollow as she could. But she couldn't. Not yet. Because Daniel had been right. It was watching her. And it wasn't done. What would you do if you found yourself in this situation? Comment below. Stay tuned for the next chapter of The Hollow Children, where Emily uncovers the dark secrets of the cult and the true nature of the entity. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more bone-chilling tales.